Okay, so this time around, we want to take a look at the new edit detection feature. At first glance, it almost sounds trivial. In fact, when I first saw it in the list of new features, I honestly couldn't think of a single reason I'd ever use it. I mean, back in the days of ingesting tape-based formats, sure, it could be a real lifesaver. But today, Final Cut analyzes a rendered video and finds the cuts. Great, but why would I need that? As it turns out, the answer is a lot more interesting than I expected. So in this video, we'll not only look at edit detection, but also all the other amazing new workflow improvements in Final Cut Pro 12.3. And as usual, I'll show you a few tips, tricks, and workflows that go well beyond the feature itself. So let's get started. Okay, so when and where is edit detection actually useful? Well, I think almost every editor has been there. You've finished your project like this one here, you've exported the master, everything's finished, right? Well, that is until somebody comes back asking for that one more thing. Maybe the video now needs a professional color grade. Maybe it needs a version for social media. Or maybe a client asks you to just send over the project. Now, of course, you could hand over the entire Final Cut library, but very often that's neither necessary nor desirable. On the other hand, the finished master isn't much use either because it's no longer editable. And that's where things start getting interesting, because now you essentially have two extremes. On one side, there's the original project. It's completely editable, but it's also far more than anyone actually needs. On the other side, there's the finished master. It's exactly the video you want, but it's now just one long clip. The edit structure is gone, and that's exactly where edit detection comes in. It doesn't reconstruct your original project. That would be impossible. What it does reconstruct is something that's often almost as useful, the edit structure itself. Let's start with the simplest example. I'll right-click my finished master and create a new project from it. I'll call it Edit Detect and hit OK. The project is created and contains nothing but this one clip. Now, if I wanted to trim an individual shot, replace one scene, or simply move an edit, I can't. I could, of course, painstakingly go through the entire clip almost frame by frame, pressing Command B on every single cut. But that's obviously not only incredibly time-consuming, it's also not necessarily very precise, especially on a music video like this with hundreds of edits. But now I don't have to. I can simply run edit detection. As usual, Apple gives us several ways to get there. I can choose it from the Trim menu, from the Auto Enhancements menu below the viewer, by right-clicking the clip in the timeline and choosing it from the Context menu, or, as we can see, simply by pressing Shift-E. And as in every one of my update videos, I have to point out that you won't see any of the new keyboard shortcuts if you're using a custom keyboard layout. Within a few seconds, that one long clip has become a sequence of individual edits again. Not the original project, but something that's immediately editable again. And while that's already useful by itself, the really interesting part is what it now enables. Take this clip, for example. You may have noticed that I deliberately used an exported log master without any transitions or effects, rather than the finished color-corrected version. Maybe you're sending the project to a colorist working in DaVinci Resolve, Scratch, Baselight, or some other grading application. In that case, you'll typically deliver an XML together with the media. But the problem is that an XML from the original project means handing over your entire library, potentially hundreds of gigabytes of media the colorist simply doesn't need. They don't need every take, every multicam angle, or every rejected shot. They only need the shots that actually made it into the finished edit. On the other hand, an XML from a project containing just one clip isn't much use either. What they really need are the individual shots that make up the finished edit, and that's exactly what edit detection gives you. It reconstructs the edit points from the exported master, turning each shot back into its own clip. So instead of delivering an enormous library full of original media, I can simply send the exported log master together with an XML from this reconstructed timeline. The colorist receives exactly what they need. Nothing more, nothing less. It's a surprisingly elegant solution. Just like AutoMask and the new Subtitle workflow, edit detection isn't trying to edit for you. It's simply removing the work required to get you back to the point where editing becomes possible again. But the workflow that impressed me the most, and one I haven't actually seen anyone else mention yet, wasn't color grading at all. It was social media. Why? Well, here I've already finished and exported this corrected version of my video in regular 16:9. Now I need a vertical or square version, and ideally I'd like Final Cut to do as much of the work as possible. For that, Final Cut has actually had a feature called Smart Conform for quite a while. When converting a project to a different aspect ratio, it analyzes each clip and automatically reframes it, so faces and other important subjects remain inside the visible frame. The catch is that I only have the master file in this case, so I don't actually have lots of clips anymore. I only have one. The clip has simply been edited into this regular horizontal timeline. I've also added some markers at some key points in the clip that will become relevant in a second. So let's go through the usual process. I'll right-click the project, choose Duplicate Project As, add Social to the name of the new project, select either a vertical or square format, and most importantly, enable Smart Conform before clicking OK. And because Smart Conform can only make a single framing decision for the entire video, the analysis finishes almost instantly. In fact, it's so quick I barely even get a progress bar. Now, to see what Final Cut actually did, I'll open my new project and press Shift-T to enter transform mode. Enable the full frame overlay from the button in the top right of the viewer, and zoom out a little with Command-. Now we can see exactly what happened. Final Cut has, as expected, chosen a single position for the entire duration of the video, which in this case is shifted slightly to the right. And if I move through the video to my various markers again, we can see that none of this framing is acceptable. In fact, throughout the rest of the clip, very few of the important subjects are actually centered. And if they are, it's basically a coincidence. That's because Smart Conform has effectively based its framing on the opening shot and can no longer adapt as the subjects change throughout the video. The problem isn't Smart Conform. The problem is that I only gave it one clip to work with. So until now, if you wanted better results, you'd either have to recreate all of those edits manually or go back to the original project. But now I can simply run detect edits first, and every shot becomes its own individual clip again. Now, if I select all the clips and run Smart Conform once more, only this time, directly from the Modify menu, the analysis suddenly takes noticeably longer. And that's exactly what I want. Incidentally, it doesn't actually matter whether you run edit detection before or after creating the vertical project. The result is identical. I'm only doing it this way because it lets us compare the before and after more easily. Instead of analyzing one long clip, Final Cut is now analyzing every individual shot separately, choosing the best framing for each one independently. Now, if I revisit those same markers and simply alternate between the previous framing with Command-Z and the new framing with Command-Shift-Z, the difference becomes immediately obvious. Every shot has now been analyzed and framed individually, producing a much more intelligent and, more importantly, usable result. And another huge advantage? Because each shot is now its own clip again, any framing that isn't quite to my liking can be adjusted individually, without affecting every other shot in the video. Now, the detection itself isn't perfect, but then again, rarely anything ever is. Since these are what's known as through edits, indicated by the dotted rather than solid edit lines, any edit that was created by mistake, for example because of a flash frame, can simply be removed again. I just select the edit point, which appears as a yellow square bracket rather than the rounded trim selection, and press delete to join the adjacent clips back together. Likewise, if Final Cut happens to miss an edit altogether, I can simply add it myself with Command-B. So even with those occasional touch-ups, the overall workflow is still exponentially faster than doing everything manually. So while edit detection may sound like a relatively small feature on paper, I actually think it's solving a much bigger problem. Not by recreating the original project, but by bringing just enough editability back into a finished master to make entirely new workflows practical again. If you've ever watched a professional editor work, you've probably noticed that their hands rarely leave the keyboard. That's because every trip back to the mouse costs time. Final Cut has actually had excellent keyboard trimming shortcuts for years. The problem was simply that many editors felt they were still missing one important thing: proper visual feedback. And that mostly came down to the way the 2-up display behaved. Until now, if you had Show Detailed Trimming Feedback enabled in the editing settings, Final Cut would display a 2-up view whenever you trimmed contiguous or connected clips with the mouse. For a simple ripple edit, for example, you'd see the outgoing frame of the clip on the left and the incoming frame of the clip on the right. The same was true when trimming inside the Precision editor. The problem was that the moment you released the mouse, the 2-up disappeared again. And if, like me, you preferred fine-tuning edits from the keyboard by selecting edit points with the left bracket or right bracket keys before nudging them with the comma and period keys, you never saw the 2-up display at all. It only appeared while dragging with the mouse. Again, not necessarily everyone's preferred way of working. Well, starting with version 12.3, the overall trimming behavior remains the same, but Apple made several surprisingly useful improvements. The first one is simply where the setting itself now lives. If you open Settings and look under the Editing tab, you'll notice that the old checkbox has disappeared. That's because it has actually moved to the View menu above the viewer. Under the Display section, you'll now find a new command called Show 2-up when trimming, which I actually think is both a more logical location and a much more descriptive name. A checkmark indicates that the feature is enabled. If it isn't, I can simply select it here or press Option U. Now, if I perform a ripple edit or a roll edit with the mouse, I get exactly the same 2-up display as before. And yes, it still disappears once I release the mouse. Strangely enough, I've already seen several people online who apparently think this is already new. It, of course, isn't. The real improvement becomes obvious when you continue working from the keyboard. If I leave the edit point selected and press comma or period to move it by 1 frame, Shift comma or Shift period to move it by 10 frames, or even use plus or minus followed by a specific number of frames, the 2-up immediately appears and, more importantly, stays on screen. It remains visible until I either select something else or move the skimmer or playhead. The exact same thing happens if the skimmer or playhead is already parked over an edit point and I use any of the edit selection shortcuts, such as left bracket, right bracket, or /, or any of those combined with Shift for audio edits. The moment the edit point is selected, the 2-up appears in the viewer and remains there while I continue trimming. Very cool. And naturally, all of this also applies when working in the Precision editor as well. One final little pro tip. You can temporarily toggle the 2-up display at any time by holding the Option key. So if you're dragging an edit with the mouse and would rather see only the clip you're currently trimming full screen in the viewer, simply hold Option to temporarily hide the split view. A small touch, but a really thoughtful one. Now, let's do a quick lightning round of workflow improvements. These are the smaller additions that don't warrant an entire video of their own, but are definitely worth mentioning. First up, probably the biggest little improvement in the entire update. Background rendering is now off by default. That alone should finally eliminate the endless "why is my library suddenly so huge?" questions that have been popping up in forums and Facebook groups for years, especially among newer Final Cut users. Next, if you choose to transcode your media to Proxy, you're now given ProRes Proxy and HEVC instead of H.264 as the available compression options. And that's a great change for several reasons. HEVC files are even smaller, are better quality at the same bitrate, and, best of all, support up to 10-bit rather than just 8-bit color. So, smaller, better looking, and HDR capable. Perfect. The only thing it doesn't currently support, unlike HEVC files generated in Compressor, is retaining an alpha channel. In fact, if you try to generate HEVC proxies from media that contains transparency, the option is simply grayed out. That's unfortunate, but oh well. Next up, Pixelmator frame export. I think this one is pretty self-explanatory. With this new share destination, you can send a single video frame directly from Final Cut Pro to Pixelmator Pro with just one click. A great little workflow improvement for creating custom thumbnails, social media graphics, or anything else that starts with a single frame from your edit. Simply position the playhead over the frame you'd like to export and choose the new destination from any of the share menus. Here you can select the desired image format, and as you can see, Open In is already set to Pixelmator Pro. Click Next, give the image a name, click Save, and Pixelmator Pro immediately opens with your chosen frame. The only thing to keep in mind is that both applications need to be up to date, and more importantly, they need to belong to the same licensing model. In other words, if you're using the one-time purchase version of Final Cut Pro, it expects to open the one-time purchase version of Pixelmator Pro. Likewise, if you're using the Creator Studio versions, both applications need to come from Creator Studio. Otherwise, the handoff may simply fail with an error message. Now for one of my favorite additions, the new Swap Clips shortcut. This is a really useful and logical extension of two other newer keyboard shortcuts that I've shown in previous update videos. First, there was the Command and Arrow keys for moving the active selection through the timeline. Then, my previous favorite, there was Option Up Arrow and Option Down Arrow for moving selected clips vertically. And now version 12.3 adds the missing horizontal equivalent. Option Left Arrow and Option Right Arrow, which until now were assigned to Go to Next Subframe, will now swap the selected clip with the adjacent clip in the primary storyline. Better yet, you can even select multiple, even non-adjacent clips and move them together. It's incredibly useful, feels completely natural once you start using it, and I already know it's going to become one of those shortcuts I reach for constantly. By the way, if you're one of the people like me who use the Go to Next Subframe shortcut a lot, don't panic. It hasn't disappeared. It has simply moved to the, admittedly rather more convoluted, Control-Shift, Command Left and Right Arrow shortcuts on the default keyboard layout. Another small addition with surprisingly big implications concerns selecting clips together with all of their connected media, whether that's for copying them to another project or turning them into a compound clip. Until now, if you had something like this, where a clip in the primary storyline had titles, sound effects, B-roll, connected graphics, or whatever else attached to it, and you copied that clip into another project, only the clip from the primary storyline would actually be pasted. So you'd have to go back to the original project, figure out exactly what was connected to that clip, manually select all of it, and then try again. Rarely something that worked out perfectly. At least for me. I'd almost always manage to miss something. But now, if I make the same selection and simply press Control-Command-A, Final Cut automatically finds everything that's connected to the selected clip and includes it in the selection. It's one of those little additions that doesn't sound particularly exciting until you've forgotten one connected title or sound effect for the 100th time. And once again, if you're using a custom keyboard layout, this and the other new shortcuts won't be available automatically. You'll either need to switch back to the default command set, or manually add that or any other shortcut you prefer to your custom layout. So, there you go. Edit detection may not sound like the most exciting feature in the update, but I honestly think it's one of the smartest. And together with the persistent 2-up display and the other workflow improvements, version 12.3 feels less like it's adding new tools and more like it's removing more little annoyances that have been slowing us down for years. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. Will you be using edit detection? And which of the workflow improvements is your favorite? Let me know. Thanks again for watching. I really appreciate your support. If you haven't seen my tutorials covering the rest of the newly introduced features, check out the playlist here, or maybe my video on the magnetic mask down here. And if this video helped you and you'd like to help the channel, hit the subscribe button over here or down below. I'd really appreciate it. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.